But they're using this Door Armor kit. So see, this plate has a lip on it. So that goes in, you screw in your hinge with just the 2 screws, and then they supply these 3.5-inch screws that go through the plate. It's a steel plate, and another 3.5-inch there and another 3.5-inch there. So that is really gonna hold everything in place. And then you put this one on the lower hinge. They only give you 2 for the middle and lower hinge. Now the first thing I recommend is putting in the hinge guards. The rounded edge of the hinge guard goes up against the edge of the jamb. And these slots allow you to line up at least 1 screw hole on the hinge. And then they have these holes that you screw right into the jamb. Just take a short screw, put it in each one of these holes just to hold it in place, and then close the door to see if it operates, because you need to know if you have the space. Here's another issue I found that is problematic with these. The screws don't go flush. See, they stay a little bit proud of the plate, and that's especially problematic where they go into the hinge. With the plate and just that little bit of screw, that's all it takes for the screw to hit the hinge or the side of the door, and then you're getting hinge bind. The door wants to spring back, and ultimately that will cause problems. So here's the solution. I use a countersink bit, and I make that taper just a little bit bigger so the screw goes flush. And be careful, you don't want to make it too big and have the screw go all the way through it. With those done, use the provided star bit, and you can put those in. I would recommend pre-drilling that. And the screws they give you are 3.5 inches, and they are color matched. Now with those in and they're flush, I'm gonna test the door again before I put in that screw into the hinge. Okay, the door is working. Now with those 2 screws in place, I want to use the countersink bit and countersink that hole. Because I did this before and just put the screw in there and it didn't go in deep enough, and it was hitting the hinge, preventing the door from closing. And you really have to get these screws flush or below the steel in order for the door to work. Otherwise, the hinge and the door hit against these screws and creates a hinge bind. So I actually had to use my countersink bit to make that taper a little deeper, because the hinges were hitting that. Now, if you simply didn't have room, if this was hitting too much, here's what I would recommend. It's a bit of work, but it can be done. This might sound hard, but it's not. You got to remove this casing. Get out your razor knife and score the casing from top to bottom on both sides, and then carefully pry it off. You're gonna see the edge of the jamb, and then there's gonna be a stud, and there's gonna be a gap between there. And there should be some sort of shims or something. Take those shims out, and then put a new screw in here, and maybe even behind the hinge too. And you're gonna pull that jamb over a little bit. Jambs are flexible, so it can go like that, and you don't have to do it much. Just put a screw in there and just sink it in, and then you don't have to put the casing back on. Just close the door, put this thing back in, and see if it fits. Once you have it for the middle and the bottom hinge, then you can nail your casing back on and caulk it, patch it, do whatever you have to do. Okay, with both of those in place, test again.
The double door kit comes with 4 hinge shields. They recommend you put them on the top hinge and the bottom hinge, and these particular hinges have an element that adds one more hurdle to this installation.
They have security hinges. They have this nub sticking out, and when the hinge closes, that nub goes into that hole. So imagine if these things are closed and that nub is inside that hole. If someone were to knock out that hinge pin and try to pull the hinges off, that nub would be stuck in that hole and they wouldn't be able to get the hinges off. There's no need for that. That is for when you have hinges on the outside of the door. But we're not going to swap out these hinges. So what I'll do is just attach these as I should, and then I'll just drill a hole where that nub goes so that it can still do its thing, and that's not going to affect the plate. Just one more thing to think about. So I take the screw out of the hinge because I'm going to put in my long screw there. And I've just got 2 short screws holding it in. And I drilled out that hole so that nub can go in there. And I did the same thing down below. Now we're going to test it. It binds a little bit, but it's not bad. All right, those drilled out, we'll do a test. Let's get, oh yes. This one has a much bigger gap, so there's no binding here. So we got lucky and everything's good.